Welcome to JGL Law for You. This podcast is sponsored by Joseph Greenwald and Laake, a suburban Maryland law firm that has been representing clients throughout the D.C. metropolitan area and across the country for close to 50 years. JGL Law for You is a podcast by lawyers, but not for lawyers only. On JGL Law for You, we will bring you up close and personal with our lawyers and some special guests who will be discussing how to navigate the many legal processes, developments in the law, other current events, and how they may affect you, your family, or your business. Today, we're talking with my partner, Lindsay Parvis, about the effects and trends caused by the COVID pandemic on child custody issues. Lindsay is a family attorney since 2002 who assists families resolving conflicts in divorce and custody, legal matters as an attorney, litigator, parent coordinator, and a mediator. Welcome aboard, Lindsay. Good to have you back.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion because I know there's a lot of folks out there, particularly in our area, and the divorce rate is jumping back up again now that people can roam some. So let's talk a little bit about these trends and what you've seen as a litigator and as a parent coordinator and in your roles as a family law attorney relative to the effects of the pandemic on child custody, what's going on, the trends, and so forth. I want to ask you first about the problems that parents have faced that may not have been as acute prior to the pandemic. So if we could talk a little bit about the issues around visitation, refusing visitation, resisting visitation, whether it comes from the parent, both parents, or the children.
Sure thing. Well, and in thinking about this topic, I wondered, do we feel like we're on the other side of the pandemic? And so these issues are magically over, and yet they're not. There's not a light switch on off switch around this. And what I'm seeing is deeper, longer lasting parent-child contact problems. So what do I mean by that? It's called a lot of different things, resist, refuse, or alienation, estrangement, but where children are having much more strained relationships with parents. And I'm seeing that in families that may have had some mild or developing parent-child stresses, that those have blown into children refusing to spend time with parents, or children refusing to follow parenting time schedules, children being more assertive around the conditions that they'll see parents. So where is this coming from? So, I'm seeing kids, because I do represent kids as well. I'm seeing kids who have lost all sense of normalcy and consistency in their lives, right? Because school changed, and there's still flux around school, even for those kids who are going back in person. You have COVID exposure in the school, and then they're back to having to do virtual for a couple weeks or some period of time before they can be back in school, and loss of activities. So all of the structure around that shaped kids' lives, their day-to-day lives, school, activities, and friends have all been up in the air. And so with that, I've seen kids tend to gravitate toward one parent's home. And that can happen in situations where parents have existing and long-lasting parenting time schedules because their homes have been separated for a long time, and the kids just want to land in one home. And sometimes that's because they want to have consistent access to technology for remote learning, or because one parent is able to work from home and another's not, so that at-home parent is able to be more of a resource and more present for the kids. Or there may have been one parent who was primarily responsible for getting the kids to activities and spending time with their friends and having them do all the school stuff and tracking that. And those parents who have been kind of that consistent presence for the kids are the ones that I'm seeing kids gravitate toward.
I mean, it's not unusual, and you and I have done this work for a long time, and it's always easy as a lawyer who represents a parent to try to structure an arrangement for the children in the hopes of trying to find some common ground between the parents. But at the same time, it's not at all unusual for those children at any age to feel more comfortable, even if it's a 50-50 schedule, to feel more at home or more comfortable at one parent's home or the other, right?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that what you're saying, part of what you're saying is that has become an even stronger feeling, if it's a sincere one, an even stronger feeling with kids during the course of the pandemic. I mean, comfort was hard to find for a lot of people during the last 18 or 19 months, whatever it's been.
Absolutely. And those kids who felt or feel a stronger connection to one parent, I'm seeing gravitate toward that parent with whom they have a stronger connection. And for those kids who had a little more stressed connection with another parent or a little more distant connection with the parent, tend to kind of move away from that parent. And I'm not seeing it be so much about the parent. Sometimes it is. We'll talk about that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But, a lot of times it's about the kids and the kids identifying that they have needs and they need to take care of themselves. And kind of, if you want to think of it from like a fight, flight, or freeze perspective, they're going to flee to the parent who takes care of those needs for them emotionally, and then they're going to freeze with that parent. They're going to stay put. What it's calling upon parents to do is step back and think about, is this about me? Is this about my kids? What do my kids need right here and right now? How can I meet my kids where they are right now?
Yeah, I mean, the parent is on the outside looking in, so to speak, who's the one who's not as close with, let's say his or her 11-year-old daughter, or whatever it may be, and not seeing her like he was used to seeing her, like she's used to seeing her. What do you tell those folks when they call you and they say, look, I was having, I had 6 nights out of 14, and now all of a sudden I can't get her to come over at all. I'm wondering if her mother has something or her father has something to do with what's going on. How do you advise that client to proceed in that regard?
Right. So first of all, I focus on gathering information, as I do with all my clients, to try to understand the situation better. So focusing on what's going on in the parent's own home. How is that parent handling COVID and the pandemic within their home? Some parents went to real extremes, which is their prerogative to do, but thinking about, okay, if the kids are going to come home and have to strip down and decontaminate the clothes and shower, and everybody's wearing masks in the home, and everything has to get wiped down before the kids can even settle in at home. Well, let's take a look at that. And how is that impacting the kids? Or finding out more about, were there stresses around the kids participating, going back to participating really in the activities that existed before? And is a parent open to kids participating in their activities and sort of letting go of the COVID concerns so the kids can try to get back to their sense of normalcy? The other thing too that I try to explore with clients is, how are they talking with their kids about this, right? If you have a parent who's talking with their kids about it, making it about numbers, the numbers of overnight, the amount of time that a kid spends with a parent, that's putting a lot of pressure on a kid and not meeting them where the kid is. That's about the parent. And so trying to shift and identify ways that the parent can connect with their kid, be involved in ways that are not focused on number of overnights or things having to happen in the parent's own home. So the parent going to the kids' activities. And we also explore, is it time for professional help and involving a counselor or therapist in trying to identify, are there emotional or communication issues going on that are outside of the legal expertise that an attorney can offer, but very important to trying to rebuild a relationship or help strengthen a relationship that's having a little bit of a tough time.
Let's talk first about two different scenarios on both ends of the spectrum here. First, let's talk about the family with the parents who really do want to cooperate, who really do want to make it, sincerely do want to try to find ways to make sure that the kids maintain connections with both parents. So parent number one is the one with the kids 24/7. I mean, they've been here with me. They've been in school. Now they're going out, but they're still coming back. Activities are somewhat limited, but we hope that they get better. We're still having this lack of comfort, and you say to your child or children, you need to spend time with dad. Kids are sincerely not comfortable going to the other parent's place. What types of strategies do you give those parents to employ? There's nothing like, seeing your parent and being with your parent, but in this unique circumstance, what kind of strategies do you tell them to employ in order to try to maintain those connections as best as they can?
So one is having I'll call it the favored or at-home parent, right? So the parent with whom the kids are spending time, having that parent encourage the kids to spend time with the other parent, to communicate with the other parent without having it become guilt tripping the kids.
Yeah.
Having the at-home parent or favored parent get creative. So not necessarily get wedded to, we have to go back to the schedule. Let's get back into the number of overnights. And again, that guilt tripping or pressure around the kids, but identifying ways and different ways that the kids can spend time with the other parent and being really supportive around that. Sometimes with that at-home parent, it also calls for the at-home parent to be inviting the other parent in. I'm not saying into the same home, but inviting the outside parent to spend time with the kids. And sometimes it's, let's all go out to dinner if the families can make that work and not have it be a stressful experience for the kids. Hey, the kids have this activity coming up and parents are encouraged to come and participate. Please come, please participate and have them be involved. And then have that parent also encourage the kids to spend time with the out parent in smaller bites that may be more manageable. Instead of it being an overnight, it's a dinner.
Right.
And have it be more accessible and ease the kids in and see where it goes.
You raised a lot of good points there, but one that struck me was the not make your kid feel guilty piece, right? I mean, I've seen parents during the course of this and, nice of you to call me, nice of you to FaceTime me, about time I heard from you. What does that do to your child? Makes him or her not really want to make that phone call again because you're making him feel bad. And that's hard because the parents are hurt, right? The parents hurt, whether it's ego or whether it's sincere. It's my child and I can't get them to speak with me or talk to me or communicate with me. So I guess when you say try to convince them not to blame the child, not to make them feel guilty, that's important, right?
100%. And as you point out, it's really hard for parents to do because parents are coming from a very hurt place and a sense of loss and grieving over their relationship with their kids. And understandably so. And what I encourage parents who find themselves in that out situation to do is to communicate unconditionally with their kids and try to do that through, it depends on to what extent the kids will communicate with them. But for sometimes it's just one-sided texts to the kids that are kid-focused, wishing them a beautiful day, a great day in school. Or parents also have access to information outside of just relying on the kids about their activities or upcoming tests in school and say, hey, I saw you got an A on the math test. Congratulations. Good job. Or you have this project coming up. I know you got this. You'll be great. And doing that also sometimes occasionally and gently with the open invitation that I would love to see you sometime, but without pushing that message and just sending unconditional love to kids is what they really need. And it can feel so dissatisfying for the out parent when they don't get responses or when they get really hostile responses. But at the end of the day, what I think kids are looking for, and certainly the kid clients I work with, they're looking for unconditional love from their parents and the sense that no matter what, my parent's going to be there for me. And at least what I've just talked about is one simple, though emotionally difficult thing that parents can do.
And I just want to say to folks listening out there, what you're hearing is from a lawyer. This isn't learned in law school, right? This is, Lindsay, this is not something they teach you in a family law class in law school. This is something that you have learned over time and working with kids and working with families. And this is insight, folks, that you don't get from every lawyer, from everyone who just has a law degree and hangs up a shingle on their wall. This is coming from someone. How many years you've been working with families, Lindsay? I don't want to tell your age, but it's been a while.
Almost 20 years.
And you know a lot more today than you did when you opened your first door to your first client, don't you?
Oh boy, yeah.
And it shows. Okay, so I don't want to keep carrying your banner, but I wanted to point that out to folks because these are times that don't necessarily require or call for just what's in the law books. These are times that call for common sense and someone who can help you think things through. So there you go. There's my plug for you, Lindsay, for the moment. And I'll probably do another one before we go. But all right, so let's talk about how you deal with parents who are using this situation to keep their kids from the other parent. And we know it's out there. We've all seen it who do this kind of work. How do you handle that? What do you do?
So these are really tough cases, and I'll tell you why. Because our courts are so backed up right now. So having the court to turn to intervene is not necessarily a reliable source of help. So in these families, you really start off with the parent who's the opportunist, who's taking advantage of all of these stresses that kids are feeling and using COVID itself as to instill fear in their kids around spending time with the other parent. If you can get some buy-in from that parent who's engaging in these resist, refuse behaviors, that this is not good for the kids. Getting the kids and the family into mental health services is an important first step. It's a necessary first step, and it needs to happen early. Getting the buy-in, though, is not always possible. And when there's not the buy-in, then you're really turning to the legal process and the courts. And on that, what we're looking at is, one, is it an emergency? So if a parent has cut off the other parent, so the kids are having no contact, and a parent's not supporting a parent-child relationship, is it an emergency that you can file in court, put it to a court, and have the court step in and enforce existing court orders, put court orders in place to establish a parenting time schedule, and put services in place. So having a court order that the family has to participate in therapy to try to bridge that. If it's not an emergency, though, either because a court decides it's not, or the client in connection with an attorney does an assessment and wonders whether or not a court's going to help on an emergency basis, then it's about filing in court and trying to get into the queue so that services can be put in place and court orders put in place in the normal course.
All right. While we're on the litigation track, let's talk about vaccinations for just a minute. I got to anticipate that and it's coming, clearly it's coming, that the FDA ultimately is going to recommend vaccines for kids above 5 years old or 6 years old, whatever it may be. And I got to assume, based on the nature of the conflict over vaccinations for adults, much less children, that we are going to see some litigation over that issue. How do you think that's going to fall, A? And B, how are judges going to respond to these types of questions? And I know some of it may have to do with what the custodial status is. Do you anticipate seeing litigation over whether or not a parent can vaccinate his or her child?
Yes, I do. But the question is, what are the courts going to do about it? While the pandemic feels and has been experienced as an entirely new thing that none of us have experienced in our lives, parent disputes over medical care for children is not new in the law, right? And we have other reference points in the law around this. Vaccinations other than the COVID vaccination are already points of contention between parents, or points of contention between parents about whether a child should or should not receive a certain type of medical care or treatment that's been recommended by a doctor. In practical terms, what do I think this is going to look like? Well, one, you have to look at, is there an existing court order for this family? And in that court order, does it tell the parents who has legal custody? Legal custody being decision-making around health, education, religious upbringing, and some other areas. And if that court order says one parent has sole legal or primary legal custody, then the parent who has legal custody gets to decide whether a child gets vaccinated or not. If it's joint legal custody, then the parents have to jointly decide if a child's going to be vaccinated or not. We're going to come back to that in a second, though. And sometimes you can have joint legal with tiebreaker, meaning the parents are supposed to make a joint decision together. But if they're unable to make a joint decision and there's an impasse or remaining disagreement, one parent has the right to break the tie and make the final decision. And so that tie-breaking parent will have the legal decision-making on whether or not a child gets vaccinated. But here's the piece we're coming back to. The thing that I'm seeing anecdotally for right now and not really playing out in the law and courtrooms is that COVID vaccinations don't receive the same sort of level of scrutiny in terms of being given out the same way you might see for vaccinations that a child would get during a well visit with a pediatrician in a pediatrician office. It's much more like a flu vaccine. You can walk into your local pharmacy and say, hey, we want the vaccination, and boom, you get the vaccination. There's not inquiry. There's not question around, is there a legal custody order? Are you an intact family? And, there's none of that. And so there are some real practical circumstances that, regardless of what a piece of paper says, if you even have one, a parent can walk in and get a child vaccinated, and what's done is done.
Right.
I also think that something that's just inescapable in the law, even if you do the legal analysis, right, that these cases around other medical issues for kids point to, which is a judge has to decide what is in a child's best interest. And it's not a judge deciding, does a child get a vaccination or not? No, it's a judge deciding which parent has the legal decision making to decide whether or not a child gets a vaccination. In practical terms, it kind of can amount to the same thing. But a judge is real world experience is a judge more likely than not to lean on the side of vaccination. And I think from just a world view experience, I think it's reasonable to expect the judges are going to lean on the side of vaccination.
Certainly in the DC area, you might be different if you're in the South or Texas or Arizona or some other place where there's a lot more anti-vaccination feeling there.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm really focusing on Maryland, which is only where I practice.
Right.
You can't ignore the judge's experience and worldview
Sure.
and how that shapes outcomes. So a very long answer to the vaccination question. And the other thing too is we're not seeing these cases coming out from our appellate courts quite yet. We're starting to see hints of COVID influenced trial court decisions being analyzed by our appellate courts. And that may point us in the direction of what to expect. But at the end of the day, vaccinations can happen whether there's a court order or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of where I fell too, to be honest with you, is that it's interesting for us lawyers to think about all the wrangling that can happen. But at the end of the day, if you're a parent and you want to have your kid vaccinated, you're just going to take them and worry about where the chips fall later. I mean, it can't be undone. You can be criticized for it. You're going to lose custody of your son or daughter because you took them for a vaccine. I don't think so. And so I do think it was a roundabout way of I think you got to the same place I sort of got to after wrangling with this for a couple of days. But it is an interesting issue. Now, one last thing I want to ask you about with regard to the access problems and the visitation refusal and those sorts of issues is what, if any, impact does that have on child support?
Right. So it can very much have an impact on child support if a parent has lost a job during the pandemic, and loss of income can be a material change that would allow a court to modify child support. You can also look at overtime. There's some parents who have worked significantly more during the pandemic and gotten overtime or pandemic pay. And also not on job loss or income, but work-related childcare. And actually, I saw a recent unreported appellate opinion that even talked about how where parents who are now working from home and historically have not, but while working from home still have work-related childcare, that's a justified expense. Now, an unreported opinion isn't now law of the land that applies in every case, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think parents have found that in working from home, trying to manage all the moving pieces of in-home learning and childcare along with job responsibilities, not so easy to do. And so there are some families, though, who gave up work-related childcare. And if that was included in the child support guidelines calculation, then that could also be a material change that would call for a modification of child support.
Yeah, and I also assume that if my children are with me now 90% of the time, and the agreement that we structured 2 years ago or 3 years ago was that it was going to be more of an equal timeshare, now I've got more responsibilities, more financial responsibilities that I had when we were, as opposed to when we were, the kids were going back and forth more frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's probably more for any lawyers out there listening. There's the Rose v. Rose case, which also talks about in pre-COVID times, what happens if you have a shared physical custody child support calculation, but the family's not following that schedule. And so there are a series of factors, which unfortunately right here and now, I can't just name off the top of my head, but there are a series of factors that a court can look at, including why is the schedule not being followed? And is the parent who's not having as much time as had been anticipated in the guidelines, wanting that time and making efforts to have the time, that looks at those situations and whether or not the not following the schedule really justifies a modification of child support. So that particular issue can have some complicating factors.
Understood. Lindsay, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights today. I'm quite certain that parents, lawyers, other people listening in are able to take a lot from this. Now, if anyone has any questions, they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to get hold of you?
Phone and email. I can be reached by phone at 240-399-7900 or email lparvis@jgllaw.com.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks again for being here. And thanks to all of you out there for listening in. We hope that you join us on our next episode. I'm David Bullitt, and this is JGL Law for You.